And Ryanson turned back to the girl. She was still watching Malholm thread his way through the men on his way to the door. "So now you've met my spiritual father," he said. Her deep brown eyes flickered back to his. "I wish I could use a telepather on him. I'd like to know how he really thinks." "He thinks exactly as he speaks," Ryanson said. "At least, at the moment he says something, he believes in it." She smiled. "I suppose that's the only possible explanation for him." She was silent for a moment, her face thoughtful. Then she said, "He didn't finish his drink." "You're all hooked up," the girl said. "Nod or something when you're ready." She was bent over the telepather, double-checking the connectives and the blinking meters. Ryanson and Hurrong sat opposite each other, the huge dark mound of the alien looming silently over the Earthmen. He never seemed upset, Ryanson thought, looking up at him, except for that one time when they'd run into the stone wall of the block on Tebron. Hurrong had displayed a completely even temperament, unruffled, calm, almost disinterested. But, of course, if the aliens had been completely uninterested in the Earthmen's probings at their history, they would never have cooperated so readily. The Herligy were not animals to be ordered about by the Earthmen. Probably the codification of their history would prove useful to the aliens, too. They had never arranged the race memory into a very coherent order themselves. Not that that was surprising, Ryanson decided. The Herligy had no written language. Their telepathic abilities had made that unnecessary, and organization of material into neatly outlined form was a characteristic as much of the Earth languages as of Terran mentality. Such organization was not a Herligy trait, apparently. At least, not now in the twilight of their civilization. The huge aliens lived dimly through these centuries, dreaming in their own way of the past, and their way was not the Earthmen's. So, if they cooperated with the survey team on codifying and recording their history, who was the servant? Well, with a direct linkage of minds, the work would go faster. Ryanson looked up at Mara and nodded, and she flicked the connection on the telepather. Suddenly, like being overwhelmed by a breaking wave of seawater, Ryanson felt Hurrong's mind envelop him. A torrent of thoughts, memories, pictures, and concepts poured over him in a jumble. The sensory sensations of the alien came to him sharply, and memories that were strange, ideas that were incomprehensible, all in a sudden rush upon his mind. He fought down the fear that had leapt in him, gritted his teeth, and waited for the wave to subside. It did not subside. It settled. As the two minds, Earthmen and Herligy, met in direct linkage, they became almost one. Gradually, Ryanson could begin to see some pattern to the impressions of the alien. The picture of himself came first. He was small and angular, sitting several feet below Hurrong's, or his own, eyes. But more than that, he was not merely light, but pallid. Not merely small, but fragile. The alien's view of reality, even through his direct sensations, was not merely visual or tactile, but interpreted automatically in his own terms. The odor of the hall in which they sat was different, the very temperature warmer. Ryanson could see himself reeling on the stone bench where he sat, and Mara, strangely distorted, put out a hand to steady him. At the same time he was seeing through his own eyes, feeling her hand on his shoulder. But the alien sensations were stronger. Their very strangeness commanded the attention of his mind. He righted himself, physically and mentally, and began to probe tentatively in this new part of his mind. He could feel Hurrong, too, reaching slowly for contact. His presence was comfortable, mild, confused, but unworried. As his thoughts blended with Hurrong's, the present faded perceptibly. This confusion was merely a moment in centuries, and soon, too, it would pass. Ryanson could feel himself relaxing. Now he could reach out and touch the strange areas of this mind, the concepts and attitudes of an alien race and culture and experience. Everything became dim and dreamlike. The Earthmen possibly didn't exist. The dry wastes of Hurlage had always been here, or perhaps they had once been green. But through 4 generations the large hall had stood thus, and the animals changed by the day too fast to distinguish them, even under Kor, if he should be reached. Why? There was no reason. There was no purpose, no goal, no necessity, no wishing, questing, hoping, no curiosity. All would pass. All was passing even now. Perhaps already it was gone. Ryanson shifted where he sat, reaching for the feeling of the stone bench beneath him for equilibrium, pulling out of Hurong's thoughts and going back in almost immediately. A chaos of mind enveloped him, but he was beginning to familiarize himself with it now. He probed slowly for the memories, down through Hurong's own personal memories of 3 centuries, dry feet on the dust and low winds, down to the racial pool, and he found it. Even knowing the outlines of the race's history did not help Ryanson to place and correlate these impressions, which came to him one on top of another, overlapping, merging, blending. He saw buildings which towered over him, masses of his people moving quietly around him, and thoughts came to him from their minds. He was Norhib, artisan, working slowly day by... He was Roshana, approaching the gate of the wall and looking... He was Lorheen, discussing the site where... He was digging the ground, pushing the heavy cart, lying on the pelt of animals, demolishing the buildings which would soon fall, instructing a child in balance. A dirt-caked street stretched before him by night, the stones individually cut and smooth with the passage of heavy feet. "Tomorrow we will set out for the region of chalk while there is still time." A mind voice from a Herligy hundreds, perhaps thousands of years old, dead but alive in the race memory. Ryanson could feel the whole personality there, in the memories, but he passed on. "Merba has said that the priests will take him." "There is no need for planting this year. The soil is dry. There is no purpose. The child's mind is ready for war." He felt Hurong himself watching him, beside him, or behind him, nearby anyway. The alien heard and saw with him, and stayed with him like a protector. Ryanson felt his presence warmly. The calm of the alien continued to relax him. Old leather mother hen, he thought, and Hurong beside him seemed almost amused. Suddenly he was Tebron Marl, prince in the region of mines, young and strong and ambitious. Ryanson caught and held those impressions. He felt the muscles ripple strangely through his body as Tebron stretched, felt the cold wind of the flat cut through his loose garment. It was night, and he stood on the parapet of a heavy stone structure looking down across the immense stretch of the flat, spotted here and there by lights. He controlled all this land, and would control more. He was Tebron again, marching across the flat at the head of an army. Metal weapons hung at the sides of his men, crudely fashioned bludgeons and jagged-edged swords, all quickly forged in the workshops of the region of mines. The babble of mind voices swelled around him, fear and anger and boredom, dull resentment, and other emotions Ryanson could not identify. They were marching on the city of the temple. He slipped sideways in Tebron's mind, and suddenly he was in the middle of the battle. There was dust all around, kicked up by the scuffling feet of the huge warriors, and his breath came in gasps. Mind voices shouted and screamed, but he paid no attention. He swung his bludgeon over his head with a ferocity that made it whistle with a low sound in the wind. One of the defenders broke through the line around him, and he brought the bludgeon smashing down at him before he could thrust with his sword. The warrior fell to one side at the last moment and took the blow along one arm. He could feel the pain in his own mind, but he ignored it. Before the warrior could bring up his sword again, Tebron crushed his head with the bludgeon, and the scream of pain in his own head disappeared. He heard the grunting and gasps of his own warriors and the clash of bodies and weapons around him. The Herligy could not really be moving so quickly, Ryanson thought. It must be that to Tebron it seemed so. They were quiet, slow-moving creatures. Or had they degenerated physically through the centuries?